The Revolutionary period of America brought many opportunities for those living in the colonies to rise to new positions, status, and more importantly, for the people we will be discussing this evening, the possibilities to escape to freedom. Many indentured servants or enslaved people made attempts to flee bondage during the American Revolution. Everyone was focused on the war and trying to keep food on the table, which made it slightly easier to slip out from underneath a watchful eye. So what are the opportunities of war for the daily person in the Revolutionary period? To acquire military status or political positions, to make profit off of necessities for war or from war. New markets and trade relationships were established during this time, but especially escaping bondage. If someone is not requiring your service or looking after you, you can hopefully, in some cases, make your escape and then use the revolution to then cover your tracks and begin a new life. Some freedom seekers chose simply to run away as far as they could and establish a new life for themselves. Many others would go on to change their names, change their identity, change their occupation, and establish themselves as a necessity to local towns to not appear as wanderers. Other freedom seekers would run to the Army, both Continental and the British Army. Along with the Army was a sense of economy and a loose promise of protection. For many men, the Army provided a paying job that was consistently moving so you wouldn't get caught. For women, it also had opportunities for nursing, laundry, or make small amounts of money providing for their families. The University of Pennsylvania notes that the Second Continental Congress heeded George Washington's advice to establish a means for caring the wounded and sick soldiers and authorized a formation of hospitals. Nurses were not always easy to hire, and so Washington blamed low compensation rates. Originally, the compensation rate for a nurse during the Revolutionary period was $2 a month, and so that led to a big shortage of nurses. That increased nurses' pay to $4 a month in 1776 and a year later to $8 a month. That could provide a lot for women and their families if their husband was serving both incomes together, if they have small children and constantly moving around. That would very much come in handy for some of those people who are trying to escape at this time. On the beginning of my internship at the Old Barracks Museum, I was asked to research potential narratives of females who ran away and used the revolution to cover their tracks, with hopefully connecting back to our barracks in Trenton, which sadly there has not been any women to connect back to Trenton in particular, but there are a lot of women in the New Jersey, Philadelphia area who did make this attempt, and some were even successful. I spent about a month going through different books of runaway ads, the Pennsylvania Gazette, the Pennsylvania Evening Posts, and White New Jersey Runaways, which features runaway ads from 1767 to 1783, which is our prime time slot for this research. We also are looking at Had On and Took With Her. That is another book of advertisements that was compiled from the Pennsylvania Evening Post and Daily Advertiser. I went through about a couple thousand ads in about a month to try and see if there were any hits of women escaping, because usually it was more men who were trying to escape and run to the Army versus women. They had a lot more opportunities than women to escape, but there were women who did try. Some of them, our biggest case, will be following her husband to the war. So these are the women that I found throughout my research journey. We have Lena Kimmy, Jeanette Stenson, Ann Powell, a woman who was not given a name, and then an African-American family featuring Joe, his wife that was never given a name, and a 2-month-old child that was stated in the runaway ad. The woman who I was able to trace down the most information about was Lena Kimmy and her husband, Andrew. Lena and Andrew were first mentioned in a runaway advertisement located within the Pennsylvania Evening Post on June 3rd, 1777. I have that advertisement here. Here it is. Right away from the subscriber living in Wilmington, a Dutch servant woman named by Lena Kimmy, about 30 years of age, 5 feet high, thin face, and a scar on her nose. She wears a black bonnet lined with pale red, her other clothes unknown, as she took a good many clothes with her. She is gone with her husband, Andrew, who is a servant also, and enlisted with Captain Bartholomew in the Pennsylvania 5th Battalion, commanded by Colonel Francis Johnson. It is supposed that she has gone to Bristol or to Bristol Order to get to the camp with the soldiers. Therefore, it is hoped all those that keep the ferries of Delaware will apprehend said servant and any other person that secures her in Philadelphia workhouse. Shall have $8 reward and reasonable charges. Wilmington, 6 months, 3rd, Moses Byron. So one of the things that we can really take away from this advertisement is we know where they went. And so that was my main track to find where they were going. I started cross-referencing the last name, Kim, or Kimmy, with the muster roll of the Pennsylvania 5th Regiment, and I found enlisted Andrew Kimmy under Benjamin Bartholomew's company. That was a very positive sign in this research, is to find something that is said beforehand. Andrew enlisted on May 7th or 8th with conflicting sources of the year 1777. The most logical reasoning is that Andrew ran first to make sure he could enlist and had a place for his wife to run to. Then he would return for his wife Lena, and you can find his enlistment records in Volume 3 of the Continental Line, 5th Pennsylvania Regiment series in the National Archives. So here's a little bit of a timeline of what I've been able to track down about Andrew. Within the catalogs, it records Andrew as being sick in a hospital from August 7th, 1777 to December 10th, 1777. So that rules out the Battle of Brandywine. That would have happened during that period. And with him being noted as sick in the hospital, we know he would not be on the front lines, and therefore he could not have been wounded or injured from that battle or have died from that battle. Most likely, the hospital that he was in was a flying hospital. Flying hospital records are very different than regular hospital records in the Revolutionary period. They're not as well kept. The flying hospital records, I went to Valley Forge archives because it said that he was supposed to be sick in the hospital at Valley Forge. That made me think winter of Valley Forge, 1777. However, he wasn't in the hospital during that winter of Valley Forge, 1777. He was most likely in a flying hospital between that time period around the encampment of Valley Forge. And archives in Connecticut had digitized that hospital records, but however, his regiment page was ripped out of the book, so we will never know if he was actually sick in the hospital during that period of time or not. And that's from the Society of Cincinnati Manuscript Records. They have a bunch of flying hospital records. They also noted that Andrew was back on duty November 4th of 1777 and again on August 3rd of 1778. And there was a note with his return in September on the 9th in 1778, and then would be going back on duty November 16th, 1788. So throughout his time of service, I've been noting that he's been paid for his service. He wasn't just going and fighting and getting nothing. He was getting actual payment for his service. He repaid payment on January 1st, October 2nd, October 9th, November 7th, November 16th of the year 1778. He would continue serving and being paid into 1779, only all the way up till May 5th, again in April of 1780, and then November in 1784. Alongside of money payments, he also did receive payment in blanket, shoes, and a pair of overalls. So he was either well-liked, of a good status, to be getting clothing for what he was doing. However, there is no notation of additional rations or additional money for a spouse or partner during this time. So either Lena had enlisted herself and was on a separate pay record, which I hadn't been able to find yet. We don't keep the pay records for female employees of the Revolution, but we do know that he was getting a solid pay amount that could have helped him and a partner at this time. So the purpose of following Andrew, even though this whole talk is supposed to be about women, is the documentation of his wife being with him throughout this journey. The biggest hope is that she enlisted herself. Linda Grant DePaul of George Washington University wrote an article titled "The Revolutionary War Experience and Women in Combat." In this journal article, she estimates that the women's branch of the Continental Army may have been 20% of the size of the regular male Continental force in service. Over the course of the entire war from 1775 to 1783, the best guess is that about 20,000 individual women served within the Army in some shape or form. with this large number of enlisted women, separate from the women who simply were with the army or with the husbands following, or women who were there to cause trouble. That's also noted. Lena hypothetically could have been one of the included of the number of enlisted women. And another lead would be to check smallpox inoculation records to see if, when, and where Andrew got inoculated upon his entrance into the army. It should be noted that there's a lot to uncover about his story, and he's far, far from over. So these are some of his records that I was able to pull off from the digitization of the National Archive records. So he enlisted as a rank of private. And as you can see, these are the different muster scroll records that I would be looking at throughout the journey. So as you can see where the arrows are, that's where his name is. So these are different pay stubs here, different numbers that he would be giving, his card number, private, bookmark number. Now, throughout looking for Andrew, his name did change in spelling and variation and handwriting. So that tells us that he didn't know how to write himself and that somebody was writing his name for him. And so it was from word of mouth translation, which is where you get the different names translations of, we see either K-I-M-E, K-Y-M-E, K-I-M-Y-E, and so on and so forth. Here's another one of Andrew. So this is one of his on-duty records. And so that's his master, Benjamin Bartholomew's company, 5th Pennsylvania Battalion, 1779. And remarks from on duty, following remarks, on duty, sick in hospital. So you can track a lot through these records here. So that's a little blown up picture of what his name looked like. So that's where you get the K-I-M-E and then Andrew. It's very hard to read some of these just via computer versus in person. But that has been something to deal with as well. This is another one of Andrew's from 1778. So the other names found in the wanted advertisements have all been untrackable. I've not been able to find any record of them or any connections with them. The most likely next lead with the women would be Jeanette Stenson with her correlation to Thomas Cook. Thomas Cook was a well-documented and well-known to have kept diaries. My hands on some of these records and to see if he had ever mentioned running away with this woman, if he had paid this woman, if he had ever met this woman. That would be something to be looking for in his diaries if I could find where they're being housed. And Powell was also a dead end due to the fact that I was not able to track down her master. Usually you can track down an indentured or an enslaved servant through the master's cash book records. If you can't even find that the cash book records exist, you can't find what he had. And so that was one of the cases for her. I was able to obtain and decipher some of the records to see if Anne actually got away or was recaptured. And in the runaway advertisements during this time, there was no reward advertisement to say that she had gotten captured or another runaway advertisement to say that she had gotten back out again. So we think that she made it based on her first run. There also is no trace of a woman by the name of Ann Powell living in the King's Philadelphia area. That's where the advertisement said that she would have run to, but there is no woman by that name in that area, so she might be one of the cases that have changed their name and changed their occupation before moving on to keep from being discovered. The nameless woman and family of freedom seekers are hardest to track because there's literally no record of them and no name to go off of. For the enslaved man by the name of Joe and his recorded wife and child, I turned to different specifically designed African-American ancestral tracking sites that are specific to looking for American Revolution ancestors of African-American descent. These sites proved to be a dead end because I did not have enough information from the runaway advertisement to fill some of the boxes that would have shuffled through all the amounts of information. What I did find is that they ran to the 2nd Pennsylvania Regiment records, and that there was a search for a discharge paper by the name of William Nelson. In their original runaway advertisement, it is said that Joe and his family ran to the Pennsylvania 2nd Battalion, that they were aided by a soldier, that they were able to steal 2 or 3 horses, and that they stole discharge papers under the name of William Nelson. Now, I wasn't able to find enlistment papers for a man of William Nelson in the Pennsylvania 2nd Battalion, so that makes me question, how did they steal discharge papers of a man who never enlisted in this section? And ranked as a private in the PA 2nd Regiment versus battalion. And he had scattered service days throughout May 1777 to August 31st, 1777. Potentially could be the same Will. Potentially could be Joe under the pseudonym name of William Nelson. He could have taken on that name and identity with the papers. I also found another William Nelson in PA who served a part of the 5th Battalion. So it could have been a printing error of Pennsylvania 5th Battalion or Pennsylvania 2nd Regiment. It could have gotten switched or combined. So he becomes another potential candidate in seeing if this family was able to survive and start a new life together. The manuscript proof that they have on file for this is super small, but there is also a small possibility that Joe and Nelson may be connected. So a fellow researcher, Annie Wayne, reached out to me from the Harrisburg Daughters of the American Revolution chapter, and she reached out to me with information from their Patriot database, noting that Nelson was the master of Joe and his family. That changes some things. You steal your master's paperwork and you assume his identity to then cover your tracks so that he then can't go find you because you're him. I've not been able to prove that narrative to be true, but the narrative is incredibly complex. And the more William Nelsons that are in the Pennsylvania Regiment that correlate with the master did serve in the Continental Army. And so being able to track that now adds to the fact of, are they the same William Nelson? For the same area, same name, same time period, one can think, but I don't want to call it true until I know it's true. I started this research knowing nothing about women and the revolution, and because I mostly studied medieval European history, abolitionist history, so this is definitely out of my wheelhouse, to say the least. But that's what became the most intriguing part of all of this, is watching both men and women take the situation at hand and then make it their own to then create a new life for themselves, something that they never would have thought that they would have had the opportunity to even do if it wasn't for a war, if it wasn't for the revolution. Over time, I developed a very deep passion for finding these women's stories. I even nicknamed my project the Ghost Story Project because of the lack of documentation when looking through all of these individual stories, watching them migrate across Pennsylvania to Valley Forge, to Pittsburgh, and outside of Pennsylvania up into New York area, and watching them cover their tracks and then trying to have to uncover their covered tracks. That's always the most difficult in work such as this one. This research is very societal dynamics of how American Revolution, more specifically that they saw the army as a source of freedom. I hope that my research encourages others to begin this journey in looking for more men and women who are able to redefine their lives through using sources such as the American Revolution, and that you can able to piece back together the lives and narratives of both courageous men and women who saw freedom and took a risk. Thank you.
How long did it take you again to research all of these?
To research all this, so I started working on this on the summer of last year. So it'll be almost a year now, looking for these different pieces, talking with different people, and getting in contact with different archives. That's usually the hardest part, is looking for the sources themselves. Dr. Pettigrew?
I maybe got two different questions. One is the process. I love the rabbit holes here. You're desperately looking for something that will establish this connection. And how much of this work is, these sources are digitized in the sense that they're transcribed versus like just images that you are turning pages to?
Yeah. So when using databases such as the National Archives, most of their documentation is digitized in a way that is machine readable. So if I wasn't able to read Andrew's name for myself, I was able to copy and paste it into a document and see what the computer thought. And that really helped with, because I'm not the best at understanding cursive. That's definitely an art that's been lost on our generation. And when looking at some of these old documents, they have really either beautiful or really messy handwriting. And with the help of an OCR machine, you're able to read some of these documents. But however, when you have like the Society of Cincinnati manuscripts, all their stuffs were just pictures uploaded on a slideshow. And so for that, I would have to blow it up on my computer screen or get a monitor and try to blow it up and then take a magnifying glass to it to see if it would get to something that I understand.
Incredibly time consuming for just one individual.
Yeah, and to find 5 potential leads out of over 3,000, I think that is a huge testament to the mission that it was back then to see an opportunity to run away. If 5 can do it, more than 5 can do it. And I believe that there are many more stories like theirs out there that are either documented or undocumented. And not only for this war, but for French and Indian War, Civil War. It'd be really interesting to see Civil War of people from the South using the war to try and cover their tracks and start a new life in the same sense. Yeah.
I had the OCR reading you mentioned it reads cursive. Is that would you ever use the Adam Matthew collection by any chance? And
Yeah.
anything that I think it's a great collection. I'm just trying to get some insight.
Yeah. So the Adams Matthews collection, it's a very deep collection. So you really need to know the keywords that you're looking for when going into that collection. Some things, depending on what type of segment collection that you're looking at, will have been pre-screened through an OCR. But for some of the parts of the collection that weren't, I was able to run it through Adobe Acrobat anyway, run it through an OCR myself, and basically almost redigitize it to try and help. So if you're looking at an artifact and you can't drag your mouse across it to copy and paste the words on it, run it through Adobe Acrobat OCR Reader, and that should help you a lot.
One minor point, the African American enslaved sites you mentioned something about, which you were trying to input data into.
Yeah.
What are those sites? Do you know things directly?
Yeah.
After the session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Corridor is good as well.
I'll pull up my bibliography and all my cited sources for you, Dr. Bernardo. But yeah, so there are specific sites designed for different people groups and tracking them specifically. The one that I used most often, what was it called? I want to say it was like Our American Fathers. And so it would ask you like name, location, height, master if you knew it, ship if you knew it, cell number if you knew it, of like what number they got sold on. It's very intricate of looking and trying to take any information you can when looking at and tracing enslaved people through history. It's very, very difficult when they don't have a diary like you or me. And so you have to usually trace them through cash books, which always breaks my heart that that's the way I have to trace them. But that is usually the most promising way to watch someone move from place to place, because they're usually being sold from place to place. Yeah. Any other burning questions?
Thank you all so much
Yeah.
for coming.
Thank you guys so much. All right. Look at that, 5:29. We did it.